Margaret Hayes had worked as a housekeeper for 32 years. Her hands told stories of hard work scrubbing floors, folding laundry, preparing meals for families who barely noticed her presence. At 63, she moved through rooms like a whisper, efficient and nearly invisible. She was a woman of deep brown skin that had weathered gracefully. Silver streak hair she wore in elegant waves, and eyes that held both sorrow and strength. Margaret carried herself with quiet dignity, wearing simple uniforms with pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. Those pearls were her one luxury, her small rebellion against disappearing completely. Her daughter, Lisa, was her entire world. A bright, ambitious young woman of 31 with her mother's warm smile and determined spirit. Lisa had worked her way through college while Margaret cleaned houses to pay tuition. Now, Lisa was an accountant at Crawford and Associates, a prestigious firm downtown. For years, Margaret had cleaned the home of Victoria Crawford. Victoria was 58, rail-thin, with sharp features and sharper words. Her home was a monument to wealth: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, rooms that echoed with emptiness despite being full of expensive things. Victoria treated Margaret like furniture. Useful, replaceable, barely human, the baseboards are. Dusty Margaret, Victoria would say without looking up from her phone. And don't use the guest bathroom. That's not for help, Margaret would nod quietly. She needed the job. The pay was good, and pride didn't pay bills. What Victoria didn't know was that Lisa had recently married. A small, intimate ceremony that Margaret had saved for years to afford. Lisa's husband, David Crawford, came from money, but he was kind, gentle. He'd fallen in love with Lisa's intelligence and warmth, and he respected the woman who'd raised her. David was 33, tall and handsome, with sandy brown hair and kind blue eyes. He'd been raised by his mother Victoria after his father passed away when he was 12. He'd learned business from her, but not her cruelty. Somehow, he'd emerged compassionate despite his upbringing. Margaret had met David several times. She'd seen how he looked at her daughter like she hung the moon and stars. It filled her heart with joy she'd rarely known. But Margaret hadn't yet met David's mother, and David hadn't mentioned that his mother had a housekeeper named Margaret. The connection remained invisible, waiting. The revelation came on a Wednesday afternoon. Victoria was hosting a family dinner, something she rarely did. But David had insisted on introducing his new wife to extended family members. Victoria had agreed with reluctance barely concealed behind her practiced social smile. "Margaret, I'll need extra help tonight," Victoria announced that morning. "My son is bringing his new wife. Some girl from nowhere, I'm sure. But family is family." Margaret's hands pushed over the silver she was polishing. Her daughter was coming here tonight. She said nothing. Her mind raced. Should she tell Victoria now? Should she call Lisa and warn her? But something deeper stirred in Margaret's chest. Curiosity. And perhaps something else. She wanted to see Victoria's face when the truth revealed itself naturally. Evening arrived with golden autumn light streaming through Victoria's windows. Margaret prepared the dining room impeccably: fresh flowers, fine china, candles that cast warm glows across the table. She wore her usual uniform, her pearls, her quiet dignity. The doorbell rang. Victoria swept to the door, her smile manufactured and tight. "David, darling." "Mother." David's voice was warm but cautious. He stepped inside, and behind him came Lisa. Lisa looked beautiful. She wore a simple blue dress that complemented her brown skin, her natural hair styled elegantly. Her eyes scanned the grand foyer with wonder and slight discomfort. Then her gaze landed on Margaret, standing near the dining room entrance. Their eyes met. Time suspended itself. Lisa's mouth opened slightly. "Mama." Margaret's heart swelled. "Baby girl." Victoria's head snapped between them, her expression cycling through confusion, realization, and something like horror. What is this?" David stepped forward, his hand protective, on Lisa's back. "Mother, this is my wife, Lisa Hayes Crawford." "Lisa, this is my mother, Victoria." Victoria's face had gone pale beneath her makeup, her eyes fixed on Margaret with dawning comprehension. "Your daughter?" "This is your daughter?" Margaret met her gaze steadily. After 32 years of being invisible, she let herself be fully seen. "Yes, Mrs. Crawford. This is my daughter, your new daughter-in-law." The silence that followed was profound. Victoria had spent years treating Margaret as less than human, dismissing her, demeaning her, never once asking about her life or her family, never once seeing the woman behind the uniform. And now that invisible woman was family. Lisa moved first, She crossed to her mother and embraced her gently, whispering, "It's okay, Mama. I'm here." David watched his mother with an expression that held both sympathy and disappointment. "Mother, you didn't tell me you had a housekeeper named Margaret." "I didn't." Victoria's voice was thin. "I didn't know." "You never asked," Margaret said softly. Not unkindly, just truthfully. Dinner was awkward. Victoria struggled through the meal. Her usual commanding presence reduced to brittle politeness. She kept looking at Margaret serving the food, the same hands that had cleaned her toilets now belonging to her son's mother-in-law. Lisa handled it with grace that made Margaret's heart swell with pride. She spoke warmly to Victoria, asked about David's childhood, tried to build bridges even as Victoria's responses came stilted and uncomfortable. David kept glancing at his mother with growing understanding. How many times had Margaret been in this house while he visited? How many times had his mother been cruel in ways he hadn't witnessed? After dessert, Victoria excused herself to the kitchen. Margaret followed. They stood in the bright, sterile space where Margaret had worked for decades. Victoria's hands gripped the counter, her knuckles white. "I suppose you think this is very funny," Victoria finally said, her voice tight. "No," Margaret replied gently. "I don't think there's anything funny about it. You must be thrilled. The housekeeper's daughter marrying my son. Moving up in the world." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried no anger, only dignity. "My daughter didn't marry your son for money, Mrs. Crawford. She married him because he's kind, because he sees her." "Really sees her? The way you never saw me?" Victoria's face crumbled slightly. For the first time in 32 years, Margaret saw something beyond the cold facade. Fear, shame, vulnerability. Victoria started, then stopped. "I never meant." "You never thought about it at all," Margaret said, not unkindly. That was worse. What followed in the coming months wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was slow, careful, human. Victoria couldn't avoid Margaret anymore. Every family dinner, every holiday. There she was, not as the housekeeper, but as family, wearing her pearls, speaking with quiet authority about her daughter, her life, her experiences. David insisted his mother treat Margaret differently. "Either you respect Lisa's mother, or you don't see ours," he said firmly. For the first time in his life, he stood up to Victoria in a way that mattered. Victoria resisted at first. Pride is a stubborn thing. But slowly, cracks appeared in her armor. One evening, Victoria asked Margaret to sit rather than serve. Margaret did, though it felt strange. They sat across from each other at the dining room table. Two women who'd occupied the same space for decades without truly meeting. "Why did you stay?" Victoria asked suddenly. "All those years. Why did you stay working for me?" Margaret considered the question. "Because I needed to provide for Lisa. Because jobs like yours paid well. Because I understood that your cruelty came from something broken inside you, not from anything lacking in me." Victoria's eyes glistened. "I'm not good at this. At being warm, I know," Margaret said gently. "But you could try." Change came in small moments. Victoria asked Margaret about her life. Really asked. Listened to stories about Lisa's childhood, about Margaret's late husband, about dreams deferred and hopes realized through her daughter's success. Victoria stopped calling her the help and started using her name with something approaching respect. When Margaret mentioned needing surgery for her knee worn down from years of hard work, Victoria insisted on helping with medical costs. "Family helps family," she said stiffly, as if testing out the words. Lisa watched her mother and mother-in-law navigate this strange new relationship with amazement. "Mama, I never thought I'd see her be kind to you," she whispered one evening. "People can change," Margaret replied, "when they're given reason to. Your father-in-law's kindness came from somewhere. Maybe there's more of him in her than she let herself remember." The true turning point came a year after that first dinner. Margaret arrived one morning to find Victoria crying at her kitchen table, still in her robe. It was so shocking that Margaret almost turned around. But something stopped her. "Mrs. Crawford?" Victoria looked up, her makeup less phased, vulnerable, and older than Margaret had ever seen it. "I pushed everyone away," she whispered. "My husband, my son, everyone who tried to care. I was so afraid of being hurt that I hurt them first." Margaret sat down slowly. For 32 years, she'd been the listener to this woman's commands. Now, she chose to listen to her pain. "After Henry died," Victoria continued, voice breaking, "I built walls so high that David could barely reach me. I taught him independence by being cold. I thought I was making him strong, but I was just making him lonely." He turned out kind anyway, Margaret said softly. That speaks to something good in him. Maybe something he learned from you in moments you don't remember. Maybe from your husband's memory. Victoria shook her head. I don't deserve your kindness. Kindness isn't about deserving, Margaret replied. It's about choosing. Every day, I chose to remain kind despite how you treated me. Now, you get to choose too. You can keep being the woman who sees people as beneath her. Or you can be the grandmother my daughter's children will need. Victoria's eyes widened. Children? Margaret smiled. Lisa's pregnant. She's waiting to tell David tonight. You'll be a grandmother in 7 months. For the first time in 3 decades, Victoria reached across the table and took Margaret's hand. Her grip was tentative and sure, but real. Help me, Victoria whispered. I don't know how to be warm, but I want to try. For David. For Lisa. For the baby. Margaret squeezed her hand. Then we'll figure it out together. Family does that. The baby came in spring, a beautiful girl with David's eyes and Lisa's smile. They named her Grace. Victoria held her granddaughter with tears streaming down her face. All her practiced coldness melted away by tiny fingers and innocent trust. Margaret stood beside her, guiding her arms, showing her how to support the baby's head. She's perfect. Victoria breathed. She is. Margaret agreed. And she's going to grow up knowing to grandmothers who love her, who see her, who will teach her that family isn't about blood or money or pride. It's about showing up, being present, being kind. Victoria looked at Margaret, really looked at her. Perhaps for the first time. I wasted so many years not seeing you, but you see me now, Margaret said gently. That's what matters. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward. David watched his mother and mother-in-law standing together, cooing over his daughter, and felt something in his chest expand with gratitude and wonder. His wife had given him so many gifts, her love, her partnership, this beautiful child. But perhaps the greatest gift was watching his mother slowly become human again. Years passed, Grace grew, and then came her brother, Michael. Victoria learned to laugh again, to soften, to let people close. She and Margaret developed an unlikely friendship, one built on honesty and slow and respect. Margaret eventually retired from housekeeping, though Victoria insisted she'd always be welcome in the house, not to work, but to visit as family. On Margaret's 68th birthday, Victoria threw her a party. Not the stiff, formal affairs she usually hosted, but something warm and genuine. Family and friends gathered, and Victoria stood to give a toast. I spent most of my life building walls, she said, her voice steady but emotional. I thought they protected me, but they only made me small. Margaret taught me something I should have learned long ago, that dignity isn't about making yourself big by making others small. It's about seeing the humanity in everyone, especially those we're tempted to overlook. She raised her glass to Margaret, her eyes bright with tears. Thank you for your patience, your grace, your willingness to let me become better, even when I didn't deserve it. You are family in every way that matters. Margaret smiled, her pearls catching the light, surrounded by her daughter, son-in-law, grandchildren, and a woman who'd finally learned to see her, to kindness, Margaret said softly, and to second chances, to family. Everyone echoed, and in that moment, in that room full of love and warmth and hard-won understanding, Margaret Hayes felt fully seen, finally, completely. Home. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply being seen. Sometimes the sweetest victory is watching someone discover their own humanity. And sometimes family is built not from blood, but from the slow, patient work of choosing kindness over pride and connection over walls.